Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rosalind Rivas. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the public programs manager at NYC Audubon. And thank you so much for joining us. This is our first lecture of our 2022 to 2023 lecture series. And before we move on, I would like to thank Claude and Lucienne Bloch for all of their support in making this lecture series a reality. For those who don't know, NYC Audubon is an environmental nonprofit organization that works to protect wild birds and habitat in the 5 boroughs, improving the quality of life for all New Yorkers. And we engage people throughout the city with various programs, from tons of bird outings to festivals to lectures like these. And I am so happy to introduce Alyssa Bueno as our first speaker for this year's lecture series. Alyssa currently teaches bird photography and shares resources on how to take ethical photos on her Instagram, which is awesome. Everyone should follow if you have an Instagram. And also Twitter, right? Yeah. She's also a master's student at Queens College studying tidal marsh birds, including the salt marsh sparrow. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Alyssa for over a decade because we happened to go to the same middle school, just a year apart. And I was so delighted to hear how into birds she is, especially after attending many Feminist Bird Club events. Shout out to the Feminist Bird Club. Yes, as a reminder, this lecture will be recorded and we'll use the last few minutes for Q&A. You're all muted, but feel free to use the chat function and enter questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them throughout the lecture and at the end. And with that, take it away, Alyssa.
Thanks, Roslyn. I'm really excited to be doing this today. Okay, let me take over your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Oh, no, hold on. Sorry.
It's always tricky.
Okay, I think we're back. Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me. Like Rosalind said, I have been doing birding and bird photography related things for the past 3 years, and I live in the Bronx, so I'm very familiar with urban parks and urban wildlife. And that's kind of what today's topic will be surrounding, as well as in addition to intro bird photography and some just sort of like tips that I've had in my experience. And also, yeah, as a reminder, I will be trying to take questions as they come through if they're relevant to like what I'm talking about in the moment. So feel free to use the chat. And then, yeah, in addition to that, I'm also currently a master's student over at CUNY Queens College. And I think one of my classmates, Leora, is here as well. So shout out to Leora. Really happy to see you, and a lot of other familiar names in today's webinar. And so, yeah, I study tidal marsh birds, including the salt marsh sparrow, which you guys will be seeing a photo of today. Okay, yeah, so, this webinar again is just kind of who I had in mind for to greatly benefit out of this webinar would be, someone who has something to take photos of, loves birds and birding, and is interested in sort of learning a couple more techniques or tips for bird photography with an emphasis on urban bird photography. But sort of just as an introduction, what are the 3 main things that make a quote unquote good bird photo? For me, at least, I really think of light, background, foreground, and overall image quality. And as you'll see throughout the webinar, 90% of what makes a good bird photo, it has to come from your technique in the field, really, and I can't emphasize this enough. So for those of you, and I think we've all had this similar thought where, we think if only I could spend a little bit more money and get a very nice piece of equipment, then maybe I'll take better bird photos. And that can definitely be the case, right? The more money you spend, hopefully the better equipment that you can get, but you can also take perfectly good photos with whatever gear that you currently have. And so right now I'm actually working with my 70 to 300 millimeter lens with my Canon Rebel T7i, which is a DSLR. Okay, so yeah, number one, background, foreground. Just going to give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. So essentially, background is what's behind the bird, foreground is what's in front of the bird. And in general, a clean background really puts a lot of emphasis on your subject. And it's kind of like the typical bird photo that we usually see. So in order to achieve this, you need to be relatively close to the bird. For example, this white-throated sparrow, I was about like 10 feet away. And in addition, the background should be fairly distant from the bird, which means that nothing should be directly behind the bird in order to achieve this sort of background. And one thing, and I will talk about this later today, is that lighting really, really helps in this case. So if there is overcast lighting, variable cloud lighting, and you're not dealing with like 12 p.m. noon harsh bright sunlight, it's a lot easier to get backgrounds like this because you're not getting like highlighted shiny leaves in the background and bright branches and things like that. Okay. Oh yeah, so here's just close to the bird, distant background, and good lighting. Okay, so again, here's another example of background, right? You don't necessarily always have to have like a plain single color background behind the bird, but it's also really interesting to get some like depth of fields and color going on. And so in this case, with this chickadee, I took this photo during the fall of like 2020 in Pelham Bay Park, and I was able to get some really interesting color. And you can tell it's definitely fall. And so sometimes like bird photographers call it like bokeh, which is like the balls of light or like balls of color that can form when you use a telephoto lens. Another thing is foreground color. So it's actually kind of interesting with this photo of this willow flycatcher that I took. And it kind of looks like this green stuff here in the front is actually in the background because it's so blurry, but actually in this case, the leaves were right in front of me, in front of my lens. And so foreground is really interesting, and I'll actually click on to this photo now. Foreground is really interesting because it can bring, again, depth to your photo. So in this case with the willow flycatcher, I don't know if you guys can tell like the difference between background and foreground here because they sort of blend together, but I'll just outline it here for you. So all of this beautiful native sumac in the front brought together like some interesting textures and patterns and colors. And then you also have it in the background as well. So if you have something pretty close to your lens, then you can create these really amazing shades of color that aren't too detailed and take away from the bird. So in this case, the distance was pretty much perfect here where this willow flycatcher was just sitting beautifully on this perch. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but it has something in its bill. And I, of course, will be talking about ethics today, but one thing to take note of is that when a bird is carrying food, that usually means that it's bringing food to its young, right? So it's going to a nest and feeding its offspring. And so in this case, this nest was literally right off the trail. So I'm sure this bird was used to some sort of disturbance, but it's always important that as bird photographers, we definitely take this into account. And so if you see behavior that's typical of like a nesting bird, if a bird is agitated for whatever reason, then it's okay to take photos of them, but it's always important to limit your time with them at the same time. Okay, yeah, so light. Oops. So there's so many ways that you can incorporate light into your photography. I personally love sunset. I love sunset because I don't like waking up early in the morning. So I try to take advantage of like beautiful orangey glow, like here with this great egret that I took in Pelham Bay Park. So a lot of my photos are from there. You can actually see the sun is sort of setting and it's behind the Phragmites, which it's lighting up in the background. So all these like little like balls of light there, it's both like the sun peeking through and then also the tops of Phragmites that are just being lit up beautifully. And so as you kind of have experience in doing bird photography and learning a bit more about plants and the things that you see in your local parks, you can kind of anticipate things that might look really nice in a photo. And for me, that can take the form of like really fuzzy plants. So like again, like I said, the Phragmites, and then, there's other opportunities in that way. And if you look closely, you can actually see there's some rim light sort of on the back of the neck of this egret, which also contributes to a pretty interesting glow that you only get really in sunrise or sunset. And now this photo of an American robin was actually taken at harsh, quote unquote, harsh lighting. But I thought it was really cool because despite that, I was able to, take a fairly interesting photo with nice background and bokeh balls and sunlight peeking through. And I think it really worked at this particular scenario just because I was under pretty heavy forest cover. And this robin just happened to like pop up on a perch. And I don't know, robins are really funny because I rarely get chances to photograph them on perches. So I was like, oh, this is awesome. I decided to capture it, even though I was like, I'm not really sure if this is going to look great in a photo, but why not? And it actually looked pretty good at the end. Okay, so yeah, this is another example of rim light here with this northern parula, in addition to some light balls in the background. You can see kind of like, I sort of try to position myself in a way that the light was coming at an angle behind the bird, and then I was facing the bird so that the light shone through. And you can even see here on like the little whiskers, if you're on a computer, you might be able to see this a lot easier, but yeah, so there's like whiskers and like little feathers just being lit up by the sunset. Again, this is sunset. I love sunset. It's amazing. So yeah, again, make sure the light is always behind the bird when you're photographing these types of scenes. And then lastly for light, always love a good silhouette. Again, I think this was also in the afternoon in Central Park in the fall. This is actually a yellow-bellied sapsucker, and it was circling the tree. So I like waited until it came around and until the sun was properly behind it. And it created like these really nice colors. So again, make sure for all silhouettes, all rim light shots, the sun has to be behind the bird. So basically you're facing the sun, and that way the bird itself can be dark, but you get like pretty interesting like highlights around it. And then finally, composition. I'm a really big fan of composition. I think it's really fun to just play around with it and see what different styles you can come around with. And for this American oyster catcher, essentially like when it comes to composition, I don't know if you ever heard of the rule of thirds, but in bird photography, this is essentially what the rule of thirds is that you break up your photo into thirds, a top, a middle, and a bottom, and then a left, a middle, and a right. And you get these boxes, these 9 boxes in your photo. And so the idea is that you want to put your bird in one of these inner corners here. And so I have this American oyster catcher in this bottom left corner. And in that way, the idea with the rule of thirds is that it sort of draws your eye into the subjects, and it makes your photo a lot more visually interesting as opposed to if the bird was like smack dab in the middle. Again, these are all sort of loose rules that you don't necessarily have to follow, but it usually works. Here's a golden crown kinglet. That is super duper cute. I love these birds. I adore them. And they're so chunky. And yeah, so it really worked here with the composition. And the key thing here as well is that, how do you decide? Should I have space on the left? Should I have space on the right? In this case, wherever the bird is looking, so the golden crown kinglet is kind of looking over to the right, that's where you want to give it space. So that way your eye can kind of follow like, oh, what is it looking at? As opposed to if it was looking left, the photo would look a bit crowded. Okay. Oops. Sorry, technical difficulties again. Okay, and then here for the ruby crown kinglet, what I really like about this photo is that it really does show like leading lines, lines that draw your eye to the bird. And in this case, it's this branch here that sort of creates a diagonal line, and then the ruby crown kinglet is like this beautiful little prize in the upper right corner. So I have some like various tips that I did want to mention. Again, bird photography is all about technique. So I wanted to like give some tips that I've kind of come across along my way that I feel like sometimes people overlook, because as you get experience with bird photography, you don't necessarily like think to say it, or like it comes to the forefront of your mind. But these are all things that I definitely do majority of the time when I am doing bird photography. So the first tip is to get low. In this case, we have a beautiful mallard that I took a photo of over in Turtle Pond in Central Park. And so getting low and eye level actually achieves two different things. So the first thing it helps you achieve is to get better perspective. And I always feel like when you're looking at a photo, if you're at eye level with the bird, whether it's like this mallard in a pond, or if you're taking a photo of a bird up in a tree, if you're eye level, then it really brings you a greater perspective and helps people connect more with your photos, as opposed to if your bird was, all the way up and you're kind of like looking up at it and not really getting a eye level photo. And then the second thing that is actually really key for both photography and also for ethics is that getting eye level with a bird, especially for birds for like waterfowl and shorebirds, make you seem less threatening. And so we might have had experiences where, for example, we're like walking down Jones Beach, the Rockaways, and we see a bunch of shorebirds kind of feeding along the edge of the shoreline. And as we're walking through, we may be birding, we may be just walking through it. They sort of just, continually walk away from us, especially if we're sort of within that zone that they're like, okay, danger, danger. I don't want this person to get near. So the funny thing is that happens, right? They tend to walk away from you when you're upright, standing. Um, but if you're at eye level, like if possible, if you can kind of get like belly down, they tend to be less afraid of you. So I think that's really cool, both from a photography and also from an ethics standpoint. And for this particular photo, just to bring in like the urban photography aspect to it, is that over at Turtle Pond, if some of you are familiar with this area, it's kind of like a rocky edge. And so it's hard to actually get eye level without doing a little technique or trick that I do. So what I do in this case, when it's hard to actually like be belly down on the floor, is that what I'll do instead is I'll take my camera, I'll flip out the screen, and then I'll have it on live mode so that I can focus the shot, as opposed to having my eye through the viewfinder, which it would be totally impossible for me to get eye level and like be working the camera in that way. So that's a really great technique, because to be honest, I don't always want to lay belly down in the city. And oftentimes, especially if I'm in like pocket parks like Bryant Park, Madison Square Park, there's not enough space to do that anyways. So it's a really great way, flipping out your screen and going live mode to be able to get that eye level shot without actually being on the ground. And then, yeah, so again, like finding perches with few distracting elements is going to allow you to have emphasis on the bird itself. So for example, flycatchers are really, really cool. They tend to love beautiful perches, and that was totally the case here with this least flycatcher. So I took this over at Pelham Park last fall. I noticed that this particular flycatcher was just on this beautiful dead branch and was sort of flying off the branch, doing a full circle, catching a bug or whatever, and then coming back. So I got some really, really cool shots. One of them was the flycatcher actually looking up at an insect right before it was going to catch it. I thought that was very interesting. Going off of that, anticipating movement and behavior is also a really important thing to take note of, right? So when you're doing bird photography, birds move so fast and they're doing so many things all the time, right? They're foraging, they could potentially be feeding young, they could be looking out for predators and danger, they could be singing like this catbird here. So anticipating movement and behavior is going to get you way more interesting shots, because you can sort of tell a story in that way. So for this particular example, I heard a gray catbird singing in the Bronx in Riverdale, and I was able to capture it mid-song. So Another sort of tip off of this tip is that sharpening up on your birding skills, particularly your bird calls, is a really great way to improve your photography. I definitely have to say that, like, just sort of side note, this year I've definitely have been sharpening up my birding a lot more than in previous years because I actually got into birding as a photographer. And so I would say like 2019, 2020, I was just super into the photography side of things. I didn't even have a pair of binoculars until like halfway through 2020. And so I was just focused on, taking photos of birds, which is totally valid. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you're interested in like taking photos of rare birds or birds singing, then sharpening up on your skills is a really great way to do that. And then I think this is my second or third to last tip that I have here. Taking tons and tons of photos is going to be super helpful because you never know what a bird is going to do or what breeze is going to come through or what sunlight is going to just magically pop in and really take your photo to the next level. So taking tons of photos, holding on to that shutter button. Almost every single camera has the option to have like a continuous shutter button. So basically when you hold on to it, it continuously takes photos. And again, you can have like really, really cool opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you were just sort of taking one photo at a time. So in this case, I have a song sparrow where the breeze hit just right, made it look super fluffy, and also the sunlight was hitting perfectly as well. And then down in the left, I have a green-winged teal that I took a photo of over at the pond. I forget the pond, like some pond in Central Park, and it was preening and then also ruffling its feathers and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I hit that shutter button, and I was like, spraying and praying is what people call it. So I was like, hopefully one of these shots comes out nicely, and it did. So that's another tip, is to take tons and tons of photos. Another big one, particularly if you live in the city or do birding in public areas where people oftentimes pass through. And it can be a gripe for birders and photographers because, we're like, darn it, I wish people didn't come through and flush my birds. I wish people's off-leash dogs wouldn't come through and ruin this beautiful moment. But unfortunately, or fortunately, sometimes it does happen, right? And so like I try to use it to my advantage as best as I can. So, as you're being aware of birds, right, you can also be very aware of people around you. And in this particular scenario, I think, I was over at Fire Island and I was taking a photo of this lesser black-backed gull here. And I noticed that, we got a group of people coming and they don't look like they're going to stop. So what I did was, I took as many photos as possible. They ended up in one of the shots and I was like, okay, fair, make my photo look a little bit more interesting, bring it to life, right? And then the second thing was that they did end up flushing the bird. I think actually this bird was also getting bullied by some great black-backed gulls, so it was probably going to happen anyways. And then I ended up getting a nice flight shot of this lesser black-backed gull. So right, instead of putting down your camera when you see people approaching, what you can do instead is keep your camera up and, potentially try to get a good photo opportunity out of it. So people can definitely inadvertently help your photography. And then lastly, right, for this section, location can also be very important. And for me, especially this past year, I've been pretty busy with school and TAing and work and all of that kind of stuff. And so essentially, I usually spend my weekends birding and then I spend my lunch breaks doing photography. So location can be super helpful when I'm trying to maximize the time that I have out in the field, which tends to be like an hour, 2 hours, once or twice during the week. And so you can use a couple of different things to do your research. One of them being the Audubon app, which is really cool if you are targeting certain species that you want to photograph. Of course, you can use eBird as well to see what people have seen. And you can also kind of like flip through the photos that have been taken to see if like there are good photo opportunities for certain birds. And then the other thing is location also can be important, right? If you just want to take photos of birds at your feeder. So it really doesn't matter. And I can't emphasize this enough, every type of situation that you are birding or doing photography in is totally valid and welcome. And so as much as like we all want to be out sometimes and be out and about doing bird photography, you can also have like really cool and unique experiences with birds at your local area, outside of your window, on top of your building, and even at your feeders. And so like a couple of days ago, I had these like really beautiful white-breasted nuthatches that came in. And even a couple of years ago, I had some pine siskins at my feeder. So like you never really know, maybe evening grosbeaks this year would be great. But yeah, so location can be super important as well. So if you feel like at times at certain areas you're not getting any birds, then definitely it might be time to change it up, go to a different location, look up what else is near you, and that can also help improve certain aspects of your photography as well. Okay, so like I mentioned before, I am currently working with my good old trusty 70 to 300 millimeter lens, which I've had for a really long time at this point. And I did want to mention, as much as I love it, of course, there's going to be certain drawbacks with using a shorter lens, and I will get into advantages, but I want to state the obvious, which is essentially the fact that you get less reach, right? I'm curious if anyone can ID this bird, this tiny little speck of a bird. You can put it in the chat if you want. But, overall, you do get less reach. And so the idea with this webinar is how can we overcome certain drawbacks of our gear, especially with a shorter lens, and use this lens to our advantage, right? Okay, so someone said cormorant. That's a very good guess. But it's actually a red-breasted mergander. So for any of you sharp-eyed birders out there, you kind of tell with like the fuzzy feathers on the back and just sort of like the posture and the bill and everything. Yeah, it's a very, very bad ID shot. Okay. Now going into advantages of my 300 millimeter lens. So I absolutely love it. I definitely have to say that. And the reasons why I love it is that it's quick, snappy, and a joy to use. So it is super duper lightweight. I'm pretty sure my setup it weighs like maybe 1.5 pounds, I want to say. So it's way more lightweight than setups that I've used in the past. It's very easy to maneuver. The autofocus is incredibly fast, which would be super helpful, especially in urban settings where birds sort of just like zoom in and out of people's feet and zoom everywhere and can get really close to you and then can fly away. So it's been really helpful actually for my urban birding project, which I'll get into today. But it's really very easy to locate birds. It's easier to photograph birds in flight if you're into that type of photography as well, or looking to get some ID shots for morning flight and things like that. So yeah, there are lots of advantages to using this type of lens. So if you do have a shorter lens, then fear not, you can of course take amazing photos. So I like to break it down, how to get the most out of your lens, into 3 different things. The first is patience, the second is bird behavior, and the third is sharpness. So these are all like going into sort of the more technical aspects of how you can actually achieve certain photos through these 3 topics. First one is patience. Patience is key. It is, so this is actually a stock image of a little child chasing around pigeons, which I do not recommend, or like for any bird at all, even pigeons. But yeah, patience is key, right? With more patience comes more opportunities. You can achieve better bird photography. And of course, it is always more ethical to wait and not chase. So with the example of the shorebirds, right, we don't want to chase them away all the way down the shoreline until they're exhausted and they're tired and they just eventually fly away. Rather, we prefer that the birds actually come to us. So one thing that I actually always do, I guess probably unconsciously too in my bird photography, is that I always look for birds that quote unquote want to be photographed. I try not to photograph birds that are too skittish and that don't enjoy my presence, because I already know that I'm probably not going to get a great photo out of it. And I mean, unless it's a rare species, then I definitely want to ID it. But for photography, we'll just say I'm probably not going to get a great photo out of it, and I'm going to cause the bird unnecessary stress. So I can't stress enough, patience is key. Okay, Cindy asks, do you use editing software? I do, I use Lightroom. Okay, so now the second thing is bird behavior. And I talked about this a little bit before, right, with anticipating behavior. But I actually have a fun game for you all. So understanding your bird is super important, and knowing telltale signs of certain behaviors as well. And these behaviors can include takeoff, can include feeding, and also squabbling. Okay, right. So before we get into the game, the last thing, of course, is sharpness. And I try not to really put too much sort of like camera settings into this talk, because I feel like it can get a bit overwhelming. But for sharpness, it's really important to have a high shutter speed, but not too high, because the higher the shutter speed, the less light that's actually coming into your camera. So it's going to make your photos really, really dark. So you want to have somewhat of a high shutter speed, at least 1/200th of a second. And I'm pretty sure I was in that range for this Northern Parula here. And then a decently low ISO. So of course, this depends on the camera that you have, but a low ISO 6400 or lower is going to give you little to no grain, and graininess can affect the overall sharpness and quality of your images. Okay, so this is the behavior game and please use the chat function for this portion of today's webinar. So I will show you a photo of a bird, and I'll describe it to you a little bit. And please use the chat to guess what you think the bird is going to do next. For the first one, I have two fledgling barn swallows on this perch, and they look hungry. They have their mouths wide open and their wings are sort of fluttering, doing that cute little fledgling dance that they always do when they're begging for food. So what do we think is going to happen in the next slide? Can you use your chat to answer this question? They're going to eat, get a caterpillar, mother will come, parent going to feed them, mealtime. Yes, yes, all yes. Their parent came. So yeah, I noticed that there were fledglings. Actually, I think this bird, the bird's parent came in several times, swooping in for feeding their offspring. And I was like, oh, this is a really cool opportunity to get this behavior, as opposed to, just this photo is pretty interesting, but this one I thought was even better. Yeah, anticipate behavior. Okay, so this is another image of a brant. It has an outstretched neck, and you might see this behavior when it might be trailing another goose. It looks pretty determined and it's swimming pretty fast in this case. What do we think is going to happen in the next photo? Okay, put its head into the water, eat, dive. Have some mixed guesses here. Okay, I'm gonna click to the next one. It's gonna fight. So yeah, this is obviously not an award-winning photo, but I thought it was interesting because it just definitely describes behavior. Oftentimes you'll see waterfowl fighting over other birds, getting too close, fighting over territory, fighting with their mate next to them. And I find that waterfowl are particularly very interesting to photograph because you never know what's going to happen from second to second. But when you're observing these telltale signs, right, of a bird with an outstretched neck, swimming really fast, and it sort of has another bird in its gaze, that can be a very cool opportunity to take a photo of a fight. Now we have a red-tailed hawk with one talon up, and it's perched. Looks like it's sunbathing and it's having a good time. It looks pretty chill. What do we think it's gonna do? What's gonna happen next? Mealtime, rat or squirrel, scratch. Good guesses. Okay, let's see what is going to happen. It's gonna scratch. So I saw this bird. I thought, oh, this looks like a really comfortable bird. And I noticed one of its talons was coming up, and I got a cool behavior of it scratching. And then you can also see the nictitating membrane on its eye, which I thought was very cool. And I've seen other photographers also capture this moment as well. In this next image, I have another photo of a red-tailed hawk. It's looking quite determined, and it's actually not looking at me at all. It's looking at something ahead of it, and it's got its body sort of positioned ahead of the branch, kind of tipping over a little bit. What do we think is going to happen here? Okay, swoop to catch prey, dive, take off. Great guesses, you guys. Awesome. Take off. So yeah, here in this case, I saw this red-tailed hawk. I really was like, oh wow, it looks like it's kind of looking at something. I looked over to my left, and there was a squirrel. It was doing its weird noise, like the like that. It almost sounds like a catbird type of noise. And then all of a sudden, this red-tailed hawk flew off, taking off after the squirrel. And the key thing here is I would have never been able to take this photo if I wasn't there for this photo, right? So because I was here for this photo, I was prepared for that takeoff. And takeoffs are actually really hard to get focus of. Let's see. Oops, sorry. So for this one, this yellow-bellied sapsucker, it's kind of, and I kind of ruined it already, but it's sitting here. It's got its, its feet hooked on to this branch here. And if you look closely, you can see some holes in this tree. What do you guys think is going to happen in the next slide? Tap on tree, peck, bug catching. Great guesses. Okay, I'm going to hit the next slide now. It is sapping some suck, sucking some sap. It is poking the tree, just as a yellow-bellied sapsucker does. So this is really cool because I think woodpeckers in general are very interesting. You can get behavior if you're aware of what they're doing on the tree, and they're just so like agile. And I always love to get behavioral shots with woodpeckers and with creepers. So if you've like seen videos like my stories on Instagram, I love to photograph and like take videos of woodpeckers. And this is the last one for this short game. So this is kind of similar to one that we've seen before, right? So in this case, we have some cliff swallows over at Pelham Park. And there were a couple of different nests here. So I was observing them for a little while. I thought their nest was really, really interesting. And their babies were quite hungry. So you can see them kind of like poking their heads out. So what do we think it's going to happen here? Someone said fly out. Parent will come, get fed, parent fed. Good, good, good. You guys are getting the hang of it. Absolutely. So again here, I feel like swallows give you really great opportunities to do this because they come in and feed their young so often. And they oftentimes do it on really beautiful open perches as well. So you get opportunities back to back to back all the time. And so this was actually another nest, I think, and you can actually see the parents coming in, two of them. And one of the young has its neck stretched out. It's super excited to get fed. And yeah, so that was the scenario here. Great job, you guys. And thank you for everyone who participated. I'm glad you learned. Okay, so a little bit of a topic switch, but I did mention that I was going to talk about ethics today. And so I have a few things to say about ethical photography, unethical photography, things like that. So I have two examples here. They're two of the more extreme examples of wildlife baiting. And essentially what baiting is when photographers go out and have some sort of food for an animal, usually in this case, like predators, like a fox or a great gray owl. And they'll come in and they will feed an animal. The animal associates humans or even cars, in worst case, with food. And the photographer does this all for the sake of a photo. And on the right hand, it might not necessarily be super clear, but on the right hand side, the person who took this is a pretty well-known photographer who's well known for taking groups out and baiting great gray owls. And so this is really not good. The only reason that he was able to get this shot is because he threw down a mouse and sat himself right in the perfect position to get the great gray owl coming in and swooping in on the bait that he threw. So unfortunately, these cases are really harmful for wildlife because when you bait them, they can associate people with food and cars with food and get themselves into really dangerous situations. And then as well, when they associate and sort of get like used to people, they might not have that sort of natural instinct to want to fly away from danger. And they might even try to approach people who have no idea like why this bird is approaching them because they just associate people with food so much. Again, this is specifically for predators. And I have had people ask me, do feeders count in this case, like bird feeders? And I wouldn't say feeders count because you leave a feeder out filled with food. And so in that case, birds don't necessarily associate the food with people. They associate the feeder with food. So it's not really the same situation going on. And then I've also had people sort of ask me, does this mean I should stop birding altogether? Like I really tried my best not to disturb wildlife. And to that, I say absolutely not. Everyone deserves to enjoy nature and the outdoors, and birding is a really wonderful hobby to take part in. But at the same time, you can also have this wonderful hobby while minimizing your impact on wildlife. So I think of it like leave no trace, where we try, we enjoy wildlife, but we don't chase it, right? We don't put the photo over the well-being of a bird, and we take into account different situations like nesting birds and also sensitive species into account when we do our bird photography. So a couple things that are important to being a bit more ethical when we're doing our photography include watching bird behavior. If a bird seems agitated, or if it seems like it's really unsettled and it keeps kind of like walking away from you, then that might be a sign to stop pursuing it and to kind of keep going, or back up if you're too close, because every species and every individual bird will have a zone. Like think of it like a circle zone around it, where if you kind of cross that circle, then it feels like, okay, danger, danger, like I don't like this. And it starts to exhibit signs of stress. And then the other thing, again, is being extra careful around sensitive species like secretive birds, rare birds, or nesting birds, because specifically for nesting birds like shorebirds, they don't have anywhere to go, right? Like they really are so dedicated to taking care of their young that oftentimes they'll stay put. And people think that, oh, if it's just kind of standing there, then it's okay with my presence, but that's not always the case. So if a bird's kind of like looking around, not doing its normal activities, not actively foraging, and it's continually looking at you, then that may be a sign to back up. And then the last thing, of course, in this age of social media, always think about potential impacts before sharing locations of a sensitive bird, and of a nest as well. So you may, when you share on social media, you don't know who's going to these sites. So your impact is important both on an individual level and then also as a cumulative level within the birding community. Okay. So I also mentioned my little urban photography project, which I'm very excited about. It's different, right? So I've shown you many photos of sort of like the typical bird photo, bird on a perch thing that we normally see on social media. But with this urban photography project, I'm trying to get a little bit more creative here. So on the left-hand side, you can see a Lincoln sparrow that I also posted on my Instagram. But yeah, so the idea with this project is that I am trying to showcase urban birds in their habitat, but also with an emphasis on urban features. And so I really am hoping to bring more awareness to the birds that we have in our backyards in these little pocket parks throughout New York City. And so in particular, I'm focused on Bryant Park and Madison Square Park. And I'm hoping that I can also bring this conversation of urban birding back to conservation, right? Like back to, okay, what can we do for the birds? So yeah, these are just a few examples of what I've been doing. Again, a little bit more creative, right? So I definitely like have people sometimes in my photos. I try to stick to one species at a time because I feel like I want to get sort of a collection of photos. And I think the overwintering gray catbirds in Bryant Park are particularly interesting because they just stay like the whole year. So I kind of want to tell a story with that. You know, you have them sort of perch here at like the edges of the little garbage areas because they pick at basically people's leftovers, and that's pretty much how they survive throughout the year. You have them sitting here on the tables and on the chairs looking for a quick meal. So I thought that's really cool. And they're also pretty fearless. So they let you get very close to them, as most of the birds do in these urban parks. And then another bird that I've been focused on is the ovenbird. And so this fall, we've had a lot of ovenbirds that have been sticking around a bit later than usual. And I've been able to photograph them. So actually in the upper left-hand corner, I don't know if you can notice, but there's two ovenbirds in this image. So one in the front, one in the back. And the funny thing is I actually took this photo with my phone. So I also have a bunch of phone photos that I'm really curious to see how like it's perceived, you know, because it's not like a typical photo, but I think it's really cool to have a collection of photos of birds that you can actually be within such close range of that you can capture them on your phone. And then in the right-hand photo, this ovenbird was actually pecking on the sneaker of this person. So it was like pecking on, you know, like little like gnats and stuff or whatever was on there of this person. And it was just right near their foot. That was like, oh my God, that's crazy. And yeah, always a story to tell with these urban birds. They're fascinating. Okay, yeah, so just gonna quickly end on some photos that I'm gonna breeze through of some of my favorite photos that I've taken with my 300mm lens. Here we have a Lee sandpiper that I took in Pelham Bay Park in a puddle. And so I was on my belly like I usually am with these shorebirds and just like came up right to me. Here's this Carolina wren that I took a photo of in the winter, also in Pelham Bay Park. Super cute. I rarely get good clean shots of these birds just because they're always in like weedy, viney vegetation. And they're also very quick too. American oyster catchers, absolutely love their eyes. Super cute over at Nickerson Beach. Yellow rumped warbler that I took a photo of over at the lock this past spring. I think it's so cool because fall just happened. So we're not used to seeing yellow rumped warblers like this, but during the spring, they're so beautiful. A red-tailed hawk that I took a photo of where it was actually being harassed by a bunch of birds, and that was the way that I found it. I thought it was really cool that you could actually see the red tail, and I really liked the leading lines of the branches here. And an American tree sparrow that I also took a photo of in Pelham Bay Park as well, with this beautiful frag and overcast lighting. And then again, doesn't always have to be close up. I also am such a big fan of small and frame photos. My study species, salt marsh sparrow, I absolutely love them in the Bronx. A northern flicker showing some beautiful rim light, again with the sun in the back, bird in front of me, and then, you know, I was able to capture like the grass also sort of lit up. I thought that was really cool. I got this photo of a northern cardinal. I thought it was super red in the dead of winter, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to take a photo of this. And I also thought the trunk of this tree was really, really cool. I have a prairie warbler here, again, with really interesting light too, because this actually was kind of edging on like harsher light. And luckily I was kind of in a meadow, but the meadow was shaded out by trees. So I got good light and then really, really interesting background lighting as well. A beautiful, beautiful sanderling over at Fire Island that I took a photo of with some background of the waves coming in. And then finally, common yellowthroat. If you know me, if you follow me on Instagram and stuff, you know I'm such a big fan of tiny birds, like showing how small they are. Because I never knew warblers were that small until I saw them in real life when I was just starting out birding. And so it's always been my obsession to be like, I'm just gonna take a photo of this tiny bird and make it look as small as possible because they just are so small. Takeaways, right? Have fun. Don't worry about the rules. I threw so much information at you guys, but I hope, you know, some things stuck, but always, you know, be creative, especially in urban settings. You don't have to take everything that I said as a hard fact. And then finally, be conscientious of your impact and remember, birds first, photo second. And thank you.
Yay. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Alyssa. That was amazing. You brought up so many great points of how to effectively and ethically take photos of birds and wildlife in general. It was so cool. So before you leave, just remember that we'll be sending a link to this recording. So if you want to share it with a friend or needed to hop off, that was fine. And also Alyssa is actually going to be leading some birding events this Saturday, November 19th, and on Saturday, December 3rd in Van Cortlandt Park. So if you happen to find yourself in the Bronx those days, be sure to check them out. And you can talk to Alyssa about photography in person and ethics in photography in person. And our next lecture will be taking place on December 5th with Jeffrey Kimball. So watch out for further promotion on that. And you can check out our website to register. And we have maybe like question for 1 second for questions. Nava Simon asks, what type of camera specifically is this that you showed us?
Okay, yeah, so I will type it out and answer it because it's a name that might not really stick with you. So it's a Canon Rebel T7i with the 70 to 300 millimeter lens. Okay, nice. So I just answered that. Hopefully it shows up.
Right. Oh, yes. And could you also type out the editing software they use? You did mention it before. Cindy asked about that.
Okay, cool. I'm going to type it out in the chat. So it's Lightroom. Nice. It's also free as an app on your phone, so you don't have to pay for it.
Nice. Okay, awesome. And just as a reminder, I am going to put the link to our event calendar if you want to check out all of our cool events coming up. And look also on our website to the lecture page. All of our upcoming lectures will go through the winter to March and possibly continue even further than that. But make sure to stop on by again. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night and hope to see you next time.